He thought I was the intern until I signed his paycheck. The conference room at Meridian Financial was buzzing with the nervous energy of a quarterly review meeting. 23 executives and department heads arranged around the polished mahogany table like pieces on a chessboard. I sat at the head of the table, reviewing my notes for the presentation that would determine the fate of several underperforming divisions, including the one managed by the man who was currently explaining to me why I shouldn't be taking notes during grown-up meetings. Sweetheart, Marcus Brennan said, his voice carrying the patronizing tone of someone who'd never questioned his own authority. This is a closed meeting for senior staff only. I'm sure whoever you're working for can get you the notes later. I looked up from my tablet, meeting his eyes with the calm expression I'd perfected during 15 years of climbing the corporate ladder. Marcus was everything I'd expected from his personnel file. Mid-40s, expensive suit. The kind of confidence that came from never having his competence questioned because of his appearance. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding, honey. These meetings can be pretty boring anyway. Why don't you grab us some coffee while you're here? I take mine black, and I'm sure the others wouldn't mind a refill." Around the table, I could see the expressions of my other executives, some embarrassed by Marcus's assumption, others clearly curious about how I would handle the situation. None of them intervened, probably because they wanted to see how the new CEO would deal with her first real test of authority. I'd been appointed to lead Meridian Financial just 3 weeks ago, after the board of directors had conducted a 6-month search for someone who could turn around the struggling investment firm. At 38, I was the youngest CEO in the company's history, and apparently I was also young enough that Marcus Brennan assumed I was someone's assistant. "Marcus," I said, setting down my tablet and folding my hands on the table, "I think you should sit down. Listen, sweetheart, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm Rebecca Chen, and I'm the CEO of this company. You work for me." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning horror as he realized what he'd just done. "You Rebecca Chen, I am. And you're Marcus Brennan, Senior Vice President of Client Relations, whose division has underperformed for 3 consecutive quarters, and whose management style is apparently as outdated as his assumptions about who belongs in executive meetings." Marcus sank into his chair, his face flushing red as the magnitude of his mistake became clear. Around the table, 22 other executives were trying very hard not to stare, though I could feel the weight of their attention as they processed what they'd just witnessed. "Ms. Chen," Marcus stammered, "I had no idea. I mean, I wasn't expecting. I thought you were ... double quotes. You thought I was, what, Marcus? Too young? Too female? Too Asian? Which of my qualifications led you to assume I was here to serve coffee rather than run the meeting? I apologize. I made an assumption based on what." Marcus looked around the room, as if hoping someone would rescue him from the hole he'd dug for himself. No one did. "Based on the fact that you look. I mean, you seem ... double quotes. I seem like what, Marcus? You seem too young to be a CEO." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man who managed one of our largest client portfolios and apparently believed that leadership came with an age requirement. "Marcus, how old do you think I am?" I don't know. 25, 26, I'm 38, I have an MBA from Wharton, 15 years of experience in financial services, and I've successfully turned around 3 underperforming companies. But you assumed I was an intern because I don't look like what you think a CEO should look like. Ms. Chen, I sincerely apologize. Marcus, your apology is noted. But what concerns me more than your assumption about my role is your assumption about your authority to dismiss someone from a meeting without knowing who they were or why they were here. I pulled up the quarterly reports on my tablet, finding the section that detailed Marcus's division performance. Your client relations division has lost 12 major accounts in the past 6 months. Client satisfaction scores have dropped by 35%. Revenue is down 40% from last year. And yet you felt confident enough in your position to tell someone to leave a meeting and fetch coffee. Marcus was sweating now, probably realizing that his career had just taken a dramatic turn for the worse. Ms. Chen, those numbers don't tell the whole story, don't they? Because from where I'm sitting, they tell the story of a division that's failing under leadership, that's more concerned with maintaining hierarchy than delivering results. I looked around the table at the other executives, noting their carefully neutral expressions. They were all watching this interaction with the fascination of people witnessing a public execution. Let me be clear about something, I continued, addressing the entire room. I was hired to turn this company around. That means making difficult decisions about personnel, processes, and performance. It also means creating an environment where talent is recognized and developed, regardless of what that talent looks like. I turned back to Marcus. Your assumption about my role tells me that you make judgments based on appearances rather than qualifications. Your willingness to dismiss someone from a meeting tells me that you prioritize hierarchy over inclusion, and your division's performance tells me that these attitudes are affecting your ability to serve our clients effectively. Ms. Chen, please, I can explain the performance issues. I'm sure you can. But Marcus, the question isn't whether you can explain your division's failures. The question is whether you can fix them. Of course I can fix them. I just need more time, more resources. You need a different approach. Marcus, effective leadership in the 21st century requires the ability to recognize talent and potential in all forms. It requires building relationships based on mutual respect rather than assumed authority. It requires understanding that the person you dismiss as an intern today might be signing your paycheck tomorrow. I pulled out a folder. I'd prepared for this meeting, containing performance improvement plans for each underperforming division. Marcus, you have 90 days to turn around your division's performance. You'll report directly to me on a weekly basis. And you'll implement the client service improvements outlined in this plan. And if I can't meet those targets, then you'll discover that the person you mistook for an intern has the authority to terminate your employment. I handed him the folder and watched him flip through the detailed requirements I'd outlined. His face grew paler with each page. Ms. Chen, these targets are very aggressive. They're achievable if you focus on serving clients instead of maintaining your own ego. Marcus, the choice is yours. You can adapt to new leadership and new expectations, or you can find employment somewhere that's more comfortable with outdated assumptions about authority. After the meeting ended and the other executives filed out, Marcus lingered behind, clearly hoping for a private conversation that might salvage his position. Ms. Chen, I want you to know that I'm committed to meeting your expectations. What happened today, ... It won't happen again. Marcus, what happened today was a symptom of a larger problem. You've been operating under the assumption that respect is something you're entitled to rather than something you earn. That assumption has affected your leadership style, your client relationships, and apparently your ability to recognize authority when it doesn't look like what you expect. I understand that now. Do you? Because understanding and changing are two different things. Marcus, I don't need your apology. I need your performance. And if you can't deliver that, then our conversation about assumptions will be the least of your concerns. As Marcus left the conference room, I sat alone for a moment, thinking about the assumptions people made and the power those assumptions had to limit or liberate potential. Tomorrow, I would begin the real work of turning around Meridian Financial, but today, I had established something equally important. That leadership at this company would be based on competence rather than appearance, on results rather than assumptions. Marcus Brennan had learned that the hard way. The question now was whether he could unlearn 15 years of entitlement quickly enough to save his career. 3 weeks after the conference room incident, I was reviewing Marcus's first weekly performance report when my assistant knocked on my office door. Patricia Williams had been with Meridian Financial for 12 years, and her expression suggested she had news that I needed to hear but probably wouldn't enjoy. Ms. Chen, there's something you should know about. It concerns Mr. Brennan and some comments he's been making around the office. I set down the report and gave Patricia my full attention. What kind of comments? He's been telling people that your expectations are unrealistic, that you're setting him up to fail because of what happened in the conference room. He's suggesting that you're holding a grudge and that his division's problems aren't really his fault. I felt a familiar frustration building. Marcus's performance report had shown minimal improvement, and now it seemed he was more focused on managing perceptions than managing results. Patricia, who has he been talking to? Several people in his division, some of the other VPs yesterday. I overheard him telling Janet Morrison from HR that you're too inexperienced to understand the complexities of client relations and that the board made a mistake hiring someone so young. He said that to HR. He said it loud enough for half the office to hear. Ms. Chen, I think, is trying to build support for some kind of challenge to your authority. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Marcus wasn't just failing to improve his performance, he was actively undermining my leadership while blaming me for his own shortcomings. Patricia, I need you to set up individual meetings with each of the VPs. I want to understand how they're perceiving the transition and whether Marcus's comments are affecting department morale, of course. And Ms. Chen, there's something else. Mr. Brennan has been asking questions about your background, your previous positions, your qualifications. It feels like he's looking for ammunition. After Patricia left, I sat alone in my office, thinking about the challenge that Marcus represented. He wasn't just an underperforming employee, he was someone who fundamentally couldn't accept that his assumptions about leadership had been wrong. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed it was David Kim, the VP of Operations, and one of the few executives who'd seemed genuinely supportive during my first weeks. Rebecca, do you have a few minutes to talk? There's something happening that you need to know about. Of course, David. What's going on? It's about Marcus Brennan. He's been reaching out to board members, suggesting that your management style is too aggressive and that the company needs more experienced leadership to handle the current challenges. I felt my pulse quicken. He's been talking to board members. He called Robert Harrison yesterday, ostensibly to discuss client concerns. But he spent most of the conversation questioning your decisions and suggesting that the board should reconsider your appointment. And how did Robert respond? He told Marcus that the board has complete confidence in your leadership and that any concerns about management should be directed through proper channels. But Rebecca, Marcus isn't going to stop. He's convinced that he can undermine your authority if he builds enough support. After hanging up with David, I realized that Marcus's challenge to my leadership was more serious than I'd initially thought. He wasn't just complaining about expectations, he was actively working to sabotage my position. I pulled out Marcus's personnel file and began reviewing his history with the company. What I found was revealing. Marcus had been with Meridian for 8 years, and his performance had been declining for the past 3. He'd lost several major clients, his team turnover was the highest in the company, and there had been multiple complaints about his management style. But more interesting were the notes from his previous performance reviews. His former supervisor had documented concerns about Marcus's resistance to feedback and his tendency to blame external factors for performance issues. There was a pattern of behavior that suggested Marcus had been struggling long before I'd arrived. That afternoon, I called an emergency meeting with the executive team. When everyone was assembled in the conference room, the same room where Marcus had mistaken me for an intern, I addressed the elephant that had been growing larger every day. I want to discuss something that's affecting our ability to function as a leadership team, I began. It's come to my attention that there are concerns about my management approach and questions about my qualifications to lead this company. I looked around the table, noting the uncomfortable expressions and averted eyes that suggested everyone knew what I was referring to. Rather than address these concerns through whispered conversations and backdoor communications, I think we should discuss them openly. If anyone has questions about my leadership or concerns about the direction we're taking, now is the time to voice them. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Marcus finally spoke. Rebecca, I think there are legitimate concerns about the pace of change you're implementing. Some of us feel that your expectations might be unrealistic given the current market conditions. Marcus would be more specific about which expectations you find unrealistic. Well, the performance targets you've set for my division. For example, you're asking for a 40% improvement in client satisfaction within 90 days. That's simply not achievable given the challenges we're facing. What challenges are those? Market volatility, increased competition, client budget constraints, Marcus. Those are the same challenges that every financial services company is facing. Yet our competitors are maintaining and growing their client relationships while we're losing them. What makes our situation different? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It's more complex than that. You can't just look at numbers without understanding the context. Then help me understand the context. Explain to me why your division has lost 12 major clients in 6 months, while our primary competitor has gained 15 new clients in the same period. Their approach is different. They have more resources, more established relationships, Marcus. They have better leadership. They have managers who take responsibility for results instead of making excuses for failures. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared for this moment, containing detailed analysis of our competitors' strategies and performance. I've spent the past 3 weeks studying how successful firms are managing client relationships in the current market. What I've found is that the companies that are thriving are the ones that have adapted their approaches, embraced new technologies, and focused on delivering value rather than maintaining status quo. I opened the folder and spread several documents across the table. These are case studies of client retention strategies that have proven effective in the current market. These are technology implementations that have improved client communication and satisfaction. These are training programs that have helped relationship managers adapt to changing client expectations. Marcus glanced at the documents but didn't pick them up. Rebecca, with all due respect, implementing new strategies takes time. You can't expect overnight transformations. I'm not expecting overnight transformations. Marcus, I'm expecting professional competence. I'm expecting the willingness to try new approaches when old ones aren't working. I'm expecting leadership that takes responsibility for results rather than blame circumstances for failures. David Kim leaned forward. Rebecca, what specific changes are you looking for from the client relations division? I'm looking for proactive communication with clients, not reactive damage control. I'm looking for relationship managers who understand their clients. Businesses well enough to anticipate needs rather than just respond to complaints. I'm looking for a division that sees client retention as a strategic priority rather than an administrative task. And if we can't deliver those changes, Marcus asked, his voice carrying a note of challenge, then we'll find people who can. The room went silent. Everyone understood that I'd just drawn a line in the sand. Marcus, let me be clear about something. Your assumption about my qualifications 3 weeks ago was based on your inability to recognize competence when it didn't match your expectations. Your resistance to performance improvements is based on the same fundamental problem. You're more invested in protecting your position than in doing your job effectively. That's not fair. What's not fair is allowing underperformance to continue while blaming everyone, except the person responsible for managing it. Marcus, you have 67 days left to demonstrate that you can lead your division effectively. If you choose to spend that time building resistance to change instead of implementing it, that's your decision, but it will also be your last decision as an employee of this company. After the meeting ended, I remained in the conference room, thinking about the conversation and its implications. Marcus had revealed himself to be exactly what I'd suspected. Someone who was more concerned with maintaining his authority than earning it. But more importantly, the other executives had seen that I was willing to confront underperformance directly, regardless of how uncomfortable it made people. They'd learned that the person they might have initially underestimated was prepared to make the difficult decisions necessary to turn the company around. Tomorrow, Marcus would have to choose between adapting to new expectations or continuing his campaign of resistance. Either way, he was about to discover that the intern he'd dismissed had the authority to determine his professional future. 6 weeks into Marcus's 90-day performance improvement plan, I discovered something that changed everything I thought I knew about his resistance to my leadership. I was working late in my office, reviewing client feedback reports, when I found a pattern that made me question whether Marcus's underperformance was incompetence or something more deliberate. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Several of our former clients had left Meridian Financial not because of poor service, but because they'd been actively encouraged to move their accounts to Hartwell and Associates, our primary competitor. The encouragement had come from Marcus himself. I pulled up the detailed client communication logs and began tracing the timeline of these departures. What I found was disturbing. Marcus had been systematically steering high-value clients away from Meridian while maintaining plausible deniability about his role in their decisions to leave. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Ms. Chen, are you still in the office? There's something urgent I need to show you. I'm here. Come up." Patricia arrived 5 minutes later, carrying a manila envelope and wearing the expression of someone who'd discovered something they wished they hadn't. "Ms. Chen, I wasn't sure whether to bring this to you, but I think you need to see it." She opened the envelope and pulled out several printed emails. These were accidentally sent to the general company email instead of Marcus's personal account. It flagged them as potentially sensitive and forwarded them to me. I read the first email, and my blood pressure spiked immediately. It was from Marcus to someone at Hartwell and Associates, discussing transition opportunities for Meridian clients who might be better served by a more stable firm. "Patricia, how many emails like this are there?" 7, that we found so far. "Ms. Chen, it looks like Marcus has been actively recruiting our clients for Hartwell while maintaining his position here." I read through each email, my anger building with every message. Marcus hadn't just been underperforming, he'd been sabotaging the company while collecting his salary and benefits. "Patricia, I need you to call David Kim and ask him to come in immediately. Then I need you to contact our legal department and have them review these communications for potential breach of contract and fiduciary duty violations." Should I inform Mr. Brennan that we've discovered these emails? Absolutely not. Marcus is going to learn about this discovery in a very specific way, at a very specific time. After Patricia left, I spent the next 2 hours building a comprehensive case against Marcus. The emails revealed not just client poaching, but a coordinated effort to undermine Meridian's reputation while positioning himself for a potential position at Hartwell. David arrived at my office just after 9 o'clock, his expression concerned. "Rebecca, Patricia said this was urgent." "What's going on?" I handed him the printed emails and watched his face change as he read through them. Jesus Christ. Marcus has been working for our competitor while drawing a salary from us. It's worse than that, David. Look at the timeline. He's been doing this for at least 6 months, which means he was sabotaging the company before I even arrived. His resistance to my leadership isn't about management style, it's about protecting his ability to continue this betrayal. Rebecca, this is corporate espionage. We need to involve law enforcement. We will. But first, I want to understand the full scope of what he's done. David, I need you to help me trace every client interaction Marcus has had in the past year. I want to know exactly how much damage he's caused. We worked until midnight, building a timeline that revealed the systematic nature of Marcus's betrayal. He'd been steering clients away from Meridian while simultaneously undermining internal efforts to improve client retention. His resistance to my performance improvement plan wasn't about unrealistic expectations, it was about preventing me from discovering his sabotage. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. Robert Harrison, the board chair, listened with growing alarm as I presented the evidence of Marcus's activities. Rebecca, this is far worse than simple underperformance. Marcus has been committing corporate espionage while actively damaging our client relationships. Robert, it explains why his division has been struggling despite having talented relationship managers. Marcus has been sabotaging their efforts while positioning himself as the solution to problems he was creating. What's your recommendation for how we should proceed? Immediate termination, referral to law enforcement, and a comprehensive audit of all client communications to determine the full extent of the damage. And what about the other employees in his division? How do we know they weren't involved? We don't, which is why I want to conduct individual interviews with each team member. But Robert, I suspect most of them were as much victims of Marcus's sabotage as the company was. That afternoon, I called Marcus into my office for what he assumed would be another weekly performance review. He arrived with his usual folder of excuses and explanations, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. Marcus, please sit down. We need to discuss your performance over the past 6 weeks. Rebecca, I know the numbers aren't where we want them yet, but I'm making progress. The client retention initiatives are starting to show results. Marcus, stop. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward him, displaying the emails he'd sent to Hartwell and Associates. I think we need to discuss a different kind of performance. The color drained from Marcus's face as he recognized his own communications. For a moment, he looked like he might deny everything, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Rebecca, I can explain. Can you explain why you've been steering our clients to our primary competitor while collecting a salary from this company? Can you explain why you've been sharing confidential client information with Hartwell while pretending to work on retention strategies? It's not what it looks like, Marcus. It's exactly what it looks like. You've been committing corporate espionage while undermining every effort to improve your division's performance. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, probably calculating whether confession or denial would serve him better. Rebecca, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. When you arrived with all these new expectations, these impossible targets. Marcus, these emails date back 8 months. You were sabotaging this company long before I arrived. Your resistance to my leadership wasn't about management style. It was about protecting your ability to continue betraying your employer. I never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to get caught. There's a difference. I closed my laptop and pulled out a termination letter that our legal department had prepared. Marcus Brennan, your employment with Meridian Financial is terminated immediately for breach of contract, violation of fiduciary duty, and corporate espionage. Security will escort you from the building, and you are prohibited from contacting any current or former clients of this company. Rebecca, please, we can work this out, Marcus. The only thing we're working out is whether this matter will be handled through civil litigation or criminal prosecution. That decision will depend on your cooperation with our investigation and your willingness to provide full disclosure about your activities. What do you want to know? Everything. Every client you contacted, every piece of information you shared, every communication you had with Hartwell. Marcus, your only chance of avoiding criminal charges is complete transparency about what you've done. Marcus spent the next hour providing a detailed confession that revealed the scope of his betrayal. He'd been recruited by Hartwell 6 months before my arrival, with the promise of a senior position if he could deliver high-value clients and inside information about Meridian's strategies. Marcus, one more question. When you mistook me for an intern in that first meeting, was that genuine confusion, or were you trying to undermine my authority from the beginning? Marcus looked at me with something that might have been shame. It was genuine. I really thought you were too young to be the CEO. But after I realized who you were, I saw an opportunity to use your age and appearance to build resistance to your leadership. So you tried to turn my perceived weaknesses into actual weaknesses by convincing others that I was unqualified. I thought if I could create enough doubt about your capabilities, the board might reconsider your appointment. It would have made my transition to Hartwell easier if Meridian was in chaos. I stared at this man who'd spent weeks undermining my authority while secretly working for our competitor, who'd tried to use prejudice and assumption as weapons against my leadership. Marcus, you made 2 fundamental mistakes. First, you assumed that my age and appearance made me vulnerable to your manipulation. Second, you assumed that sabotage was a sustainable strategy for career advancement. I know I made mistakes. You didn't make mistakes, Marcus. You made choices. You chose betrayal over loyalty, sabotage over performance, deception over integrity. And now you're going to face the consequences of those choices. As security escorted Marcus from the building, I sat in my office thinking about the discovery that had changed everything. His resistance to my leadership hadn't been about management philosophy or performance expectations. It had been about protecting his ability to continue, betraying the company that employed him. But more than that, his attempt to use my age and appearance as weapons against my authority had backfired spectacularly. The person he'd dismissed as an intern had uncovered his betrayal and ended his career. Tomorrow, I would begin the work of rebuilding the client relations division with people who understood the difference between serving clients and serving competitors. But tonight, I felt the satisfaction of knowing that the assumptions people made about my capabilities had once again proven to be their weakness, not mine. 3 months after Marcus's termination, I stood before the entire Meridian financial staff at our quarterly all-hands meeting, preparing to announce the most successful quarter in the company's recent history. The transformation had been remarkable. Client retention was up 60%. New account acquisition had doubled, and employee satisfaction scores had reached an all-time high. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers, it was in the culture we'd built after removing the toxic influence that had been poisoning our success for months. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking out at the assembled employees who'd worked so hard to turn the company around. I'm pleased to announce that Meridian Financial has just completed its most profitable quarter in 5 years. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic, reflecting the pride that employees felt in their collective achievement. But more importantly, I continued, we've demonstrated that success comes from collaboration, integrity, and the willingness to challenge assumptions about what's possible. In the front row, I could see the members of the former client relations team, the talented professionals who'd been struggling under Marcus's sabotage but had flourished once given proper leadership and support. 3 months ago, our client relations division was hemorrhaging accounts and struggling with morale. Today, that same division has the highest client satisfaction scores in our industry and has brought in more new business than any other department. I clicked to my first slide, showing the dramatic improvement in performance metrics. This transformation didn't happen because we hired new people or implemented revolutionary strategies. It happened because we removed the barriers that were preventing talented employees from doing their best work. Sarah Martinez, who'd been promoted to head the client relations division after Marcus's departure, raised her hand. Ms. Chen, can you talk about what those barriers were? I think it would help everyone understand what we've learned from this experience. I'd been hoping someone would ask that question because the lessons we'd learned extended far beyond our specific situation. The primary barrier was leadership that prioritized personal agenda over company success. We had a manager who was actively sabotaging the work of his own team while blaming them for the results of his sabotage. I clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of client departures under Marcus's management compared to client retention under Sarah's leadership. But the deeper barrier was a culture that allowed assumptions and prejudices to override evidence and performance. Too many of us were willing to accept explanations that confirmed our biases rather than investigating the facts that contradicted them. David Kim, who'd become my strongest ally on the executive team, spoke up from the back of the room. Rebecca, can you elaborate on what you mean by assumptions overriding evidence? I mean that when Marcus consistently blamed external factors for his division's poor performance, people accepted those explanations because they seemed reasonable. When he questioned my qualifications for leadership, some people gave his concerns credibility because they matched their own assumptions about age and experience. I paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected a range of emotions, understanding, embarrassment, and in some cases, recognition of their own role in perpetuating the problems we'd faced. The lesson we've learned is that assumptions are dangerous when they prevent us from seeing what's actually happening. Marcus's sabotage was successful for months because people assumed his explanations were honest. Just as he initially assumed I was an intern because I didn't match his image of what a CEO should look like. Jennifer Walsh from HR raised her hand. Ms. Chen, how do we prevent this kind of situation from happening again? By creating systems that prioritize evidence over assumptions, performance over politics, and integrity over convenience. By building a culture where people are judged by their contributions rather than their ability to conform to someone else's expectations. I clicked to my final slide, outlining the new policies and procedures we'd implemented to ensure accountability and transparency. We've established new oversight procedures for client communications, regular performance audits for all divisions, and most importantly, multiple channels for employees to report concerns about leadership or management practices. After the meeting ended, I was approached by several employees who wanted to share their experiences during the Marcus era. What I learned was both disturbing and enlightening. Ms. Chen, said Tom Bradley, a relationship manager who'd been with the company for 6 years. I want you to know that several of us suspected something was wrong with Marcus's management, but we didn't know how to address it. What kind of suspicions? He would give us conflicting instructions about client communications, then blame us when clients became confused or frustrated. He would reassign our best accounts to himself, then criticize our performance for losing those clients. Why didn't anyone report these concerns? Because Marcus was very good at making it seem like our problems were our fault. He would frame every issue as a failure of competence or effort on our part. And honestly, when he started questioning your leadership, some of us wondered if maybe he was right about experience and qualifications. Another team member, Lisa Chen, added, Marcus was very strategic about how he undermined people. He would praise you in public, but then privately suggest that your success was due to luck or favoritism. It created an environment where everyone doubted themselves and each other. And how has that changed under Sarah's leadership? Completely, Tom replied. Sarah focuses on helping us succeed rather than positioning herself as the source of all success. She shares credit, takes responsibility for problems, and actually wants us to develop our own client relationships. These conversations helped me understand that Marcus's sabotage had been even more sophisticated than I'd initially realized. He hadn't just been stealing clients, he'd been systematically destroying the confidence and cohesion of his own team while positioning himself as their protector against unrealistic expectations. That evening, I received a call that put the entire Marcus situation into a new perspective. The caller was Robert Harrison from our board of directors. Rebecca, I wanted to update you on the legal proceedings against Marcus Brennan. His case has taken an interesting turn. What kind of turn? Marcus has agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. What he's revealed about Hartwell and Associates' practices has opened up a much larger investigation. What do you mean? It turns out that Marcus wasn't Hartwell's only inside source. They've been systematically recruiting employees from competitor firms to sabotage their former employers while feeding information to Hartwell. That's corporate espionage on an industry-wide scale. Exactly. The FBI is now investigating Hartwell for racketeering and conspiracy charges. Marcus's cooperation could help expose a network of corporate sabotage that's been operating for years. After hanging up with Robert, I sat in my office thinking about the larger implications of what we'd discovered. Marcus's betrayal hadn't been an isolated incident of individual corruption. It had been part of a systematic effort to undermine competitor firms through internal sabotage. But what struck me most was how Marcus's assumptions about my capabilities had led to his downfall. If he'd taken me seriously from the beginning, if he'd recognized that the intern he'd dismissed was actually a competent executive, he might have been more careful about covering his tracks. Instead, his prejudices had made him careless. His assumption that I was too young and inexperienced to detect his sabotage had led him to continue his activities even after I'd begun investigating his division's performance. The next morning, I called Sarah Martinez into my office to discuss her transition to permanent division head. Sarah, you've done an exceptional job rebuilding the client relations team. I'd like to make your promotion official and discuss your long-term vision for the division. Thank you, Ms. Chen. I have to say, taking over after Marcus has been both challenging and enlightening. How so? Challenging because I had to rebuild trust with clients who'd been manipulated and employees who'd been demoralized. Enlightening because I've learned how much damage one person can do when they prioritize their own agenda over their team's success. What's the most important lesson you've taken from this experience? Sarah thought for a moment before answering. That leadership isn't about being the smartest person in the room or the most experienced person on the team. It's about creating an environment where everyone can contribute their best work toward shared goals. And how does that relate to what happened with Marcus? Marcus saw his team's success as a threat to his own position. He believed that if his employees performed well, it would diminish his importance. So he sabotaged their efforts while taking credit for any successes that occurred despite his interference. And your approach is different. How? I see my team's success as my success. When they build strong client relationships, when they exceed their targets, when they develop new skills that reflects well on my leadership. Marcus never understood that a leader's job is to make other people successful, not to prevent them from succeeding. As Sarah left my office, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, Marcus Brennan had dismissed me as an intern who didn't belong in an executive meeting. Today, the division he'd been sabotaging was thriving under new leadership. While he was cooperating with federal investigators to avoid prison time, the assumptions people made about capability and authority had once again proven to be their weakness rather than their strength. Marcus had underestimated the person he'd tried to dismiss, and that underestimation had led to the exposure of his betrayal and the end of his career. But more importantly, we'd learned that success came not from protecting individual positions, but from building collective strength. The person Marcus had mistaken for an intern had indeed signed his paycheck, his final paycheck, as it turned out. 1 year after the Marcus Brennan incident, I stood before the National Association of Financial Executives at their annual leadership conference, delivering a keynote address on building inclusive leadership in competitive industries. The invitation to speak had come after Meridian Financial was recognized as the most improved company in our sector. With client satisfaction and employee retention rates that had become industry benchmarks, leadership assumptions, I began looking out at an audience of 300 executives from across the financial services industry, are often based on outdated models of what authority looks like rather than evidence of what authority accomplishes. In the front row, I could see several board members from Meridian, including Robert Harrison, who'd become one of my strongest advocates after witnessing the company's transformation. A year ago, I walked into a conference room where a senior executive assumed I was an intern because I didn't match his image of what a CEO should look like. That assumption revealed more about his limitations than it did about my qualifications. I clicked to my first slide, showing Meridian's performance metrics before and after implementing inclusive leadership practices. But the real lesson wasn't about individual prejudice. It was about how assumptions can blind us to both threats and opportunities. The same executive who dismissed me based on appearance was simultaneously betraying the company through corporate espionage, but his colleagues accepted his explanations because they seemed credible, coming from someone who looked like their image of a successful leader. A murmur ran through the audience as they processed the implications of what I was describing. This experience taught me that inclusive leadership isn't just about fairness or diversity, it's about competitive advantage. When we expand our definition of what leadership looks like, we expand our ability to identify talent, detect threats, and build sustainable success. During the Q&A session that followed, a woman in her 30s raised her hand. Ms. Chen, how do you handle situations where your authority is questioned because of your age or appearance? How do you establish credibility without becoming defensive? I smiled, remembering my own struggles with that exact challenge. I've learned that the best response to questioned authority is demonstrated competence. When someone assumes you're not qualified, your job isn't to convince them they're wrong. It's to perform so effectively that their opinion becomes irrelevant. But what if those assumptions affect your ability to perform? What if people won't give you the opportunities to prove yourself? Then you create your own opportunities. You document your achievements so thoroughly that they become impossible to dismiss. You build relationships with people who can see your potential. And you remember that the people who underestimate you are revealing their own limitations, not yours. After the conference, I was approached by several young executives who shared their own experiences with assumptions and prejudice. Their stories reminded me why the work we'd done at Meridian mattered beyond our own company's success. Ms. Chen said, a young man who introduced himself as a VP at a competing firm. Your presentation really resonated with me. I've been dealing with a situation where my manager consistently questions my decisions and excludes me from important meetings. How do you know when to fight back versus when to find a different environment? That's a difficult question, and the answer depends on whether you're dealing with someone who's open to evidence or someone who's committed to their assumptions regardless of facts. How can you tell the difference? By testing their willingness to acknowledge your contributions. If you can demonstrate value and they adjust their behavior accordingly, you're dealing with someone who can learn. If you consistently deliver results and they continue to dismiss or undermine you, you're dealing with someone who's more invested in their prejudices than in your performance. And in the second case, you document everything, build external relationships, and prepare for the possibility that you'll need to find an environment where your contributions are valued. The conversation reminded me of my own journey and the choices that had led to my current position. Marcus Brennan's assumptions about my capabilities had initially seemed like obstacles, but they'd ultimately become advantages because they'd made him careless about concealing his betrayal. That evening, I returned to my hotel room and called Sarah Martinez to check on how things were going at Meridian. Rebecca, perfect timing. I just got off a call with the Morrison Group. They're expanding their account with us by 40%. They specifically mentioned that our client service model is the best they've experienced in the industry. That's fantastic, Sarah. How's the team responding to the increased business? They're energized. It's amazing how much people can accomplish when they feel supported rather than undermined. We've had 0 turnover in the past 6 months, and 3 team members have been promoted to senior relationship manager positions. And how are you finding the leadership role? Challenging, but rewarding. I keep thinking about the contrast with Marcus's approach. He saw every team's success as a threat to his position. I see every team's success as validation of our collective approach. That's the difference between leadership that builds and leadership that protects. Marcus was so focused on protecting his position that he destroyed the very thing he was trying to protect. After hanging up with Sarah, I reflected on the year that had passed since the conference room incident that had started everything. Marcus Brennan had thought I was an intern, but his assumption had revealed more about his character than my qualifications. The investigation that followed had exposed a network of corporate espionage that had been damaging companies. Throughout our industry, Marcus's cooperation with federal authorities had helped prosecute the conspiracy, though he'd lost his career and faced significant legal consequences for his role in the scheme. But the real victory wasn't in Marcus's downfall, it was in the culture we'd built at Meridian after removing the toxic influence that had been holding us back. We'd proven that success came from recognizing talent wherever it existed, not just where people expected to find it. The next morning, I flew back to our headquarters, where I was greeted by a lobby display showcasing our recent industry awards and recognition. Among them was the Excellence in Leadership Award I'd received from the Financial Services Association, with a plaque that read, "For demonstrating that effective leadership comes from empowering others to succeed, not from protecting one's own position." As I walked through the office, I could see the energy and collaboration that had replaced the fear and competition that had characterized the Marcus era. Employees were sharing ideas freely, supporting each other's success, and building the kind of inclusive culture that attracted and retained top talent. In my office, I found a handwritten note from one of our newest hires, a recent MBA graduate who'd chosen Meridian over several larger competitors. Ms. Chen, the note read, "Thank you for creating an environment where people are judged by their contributions rather than their conformity to traditional expectations. Your leadership has shown me what's possible when assumptions are replaced by evidence and prejudice is replaced by performance." I smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this point. Marcus Brennan had dismissed me as an intern who didn't belong in an executive meeting. Today, that same intern was leading a company that had become a model for inclusive leadership in our industry. The assumptions people made about authority and capability continued to reveal more about their alienations than about the potential of the people they underestimated. True authority isn't inherited or assumed, it's earned. Through the success of the people you lead and the positive impact you create,